So welcome to part 2, the follow-up of the video that I did 2 weeks ago on why I moved from Pentax to Panasonic. I've been overwhelmed by the response, mostly positive, mostly constructive. Of course, there's a few flamers and a few trolls on there, but hey, everybody's got an opinion. As my father used to say, opinions are like arseholes. Everybody's got one, and mostly they're full of, well, you know. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to get out and shoot much over the last couple of weeks. I tore a muscle in my back the day after doing that video, and I've been having skin cancer treatment on my face. You can see there's a couple of red patches here, so I haven't been able to get out in the sun, and even on a shady day like this, I've got to be wearing the hat, so apologies for peering out from underneath the brim of a hat. But I did get out yesterday afternoon and travelled to northern Victoria along the Murray River, just to see what I could find. I haven't been up there for a while, and I wanted to shoot a bit of wildlife, a bit of landscape, and hopefully, if the sky stayed clear, a couple of astrophotography shots. And I managed to get all of that in. I didn't take any video gear. I just simply went out, took the camera, and shot a few shots. So here's some more examples of what I've been able to get with 2 weeks of practice on the Panasonic G9.
So this first shot for the day is of a kookaburra, a large Australian native kingfisher. It's shot in the shade, sitting on the branch of a river red gum with the trunk of another river red gum tree behind it. It's at ISO 200, focal length of 250mm, shot at f5.6 at 1/200th of a second, handheld with the dual stabilisation turned on. And as you can see, there's a fair amount of detail in the bird. This is the straight raw file, straight out of camera. Enough blur in the background, but that trunk of that tree is only about 1.5 meters behind the bird, so I wouldn't have expected too much blur on there at f5.6. But if we go to a fully processed image, you can see there's a huge amount of detail in there that can be pulled out, and so I'm quite happy with that. This is just a little bit over processed just to see how much I could pull out of it, but at normal size it looks pretty good. So the next bird is an emu, a large flightless bird in Australia. And these were really harsh conditions. It's the middle of a hot day, and you can see in the background how much heat haze there is. I'm shooting at, again, ISO 200, 400mm, f6.3, which is wide open at 400mm, handheld at 1/800th of a second. And if we zoom in here, there's nice detail in the feathers, enough blur in the background, but some of it, because of the heat haze, is really quite irritating. But with a little bit of work in Photoshop, you can blur that background just a little bit and sharpen up the bird in the foreground to be quite an attractive shot. Not the greatest shot in the world because of the conditions, but overhead sun being what it is, I have been able to pull enough detail out here, so I'm quite happy with the ability to do that. And again, handheld on this lens at an 800mm full frame equivalent. I also have a thing about reflections in water, and so whenever I'm around rivers, lakes, the sea, if it's calm enough, I'm looking for reflections, and I found this beautiful reflection of these river red gum trees in a creek just off the Murray River. This is the raw file straight out of camera, and with just a little bit of tweaking in Lightroom, it comes up beautifully. Very pleased with that. The next shot I was looking to get was some shots of the Murray River at sunset, but it's a long weekend and there are a lot of people camping and having day trips on the river, a lot of boats on the river, and a lot of people on the beaches along the banks of the river. So instead of getting a wide-angle sunset shot, I was looking for branches sticking out of the river to see if I could get a close-up. This one is ISO 200, shot at 68mm on the 35 to 100mm lens, f13 at 60 seconds, and I've got a 10-stop neutral density filter over it. This is the first time I've tested the camera and these lenses with filters on, because I didn't have the 55mm adapter for the two smaller lenses previously, and I'm quite happy with this. It's sharp, it renders the colours and the background really nicely, and if we zoom in, there's enough detail in the branch here that I'm quite happy with. So there was a tiny little bit of movement in that branch as the water was flowing from right to left past it, which is probably explaining why it's not as absolutely sharp as I would like, but it's pretty good. So as I was leaving the Murray River, I found a small family group of eastern grey kangaroos. And this adult male, as they often do when they've got females and young around, they will stand their ground. The females and the young will usually move away into the bush, but the males will stand their ground and look at you. You can see he's looking straight down the barrel of the lens here. I stayed in the car and just wound the window down and shot handheld, even with the engine on. Normally I would turn the engine off to stop the vibration, but the stabilization in this lens was good enough to avoid that. Even if I look very close in, there's a fair amount of detail, and this is the straight RAW file with no adjustments done to it. And you can see the detail in the kangaroo's face and fur, and the out of focus background is quite nice. And if we look at a processed image, it comes up beautifully. So very pleased with that. And another theme that I'm following in my travels around while I've got the camera in the car with me is to look for classic Australian landscapes shot from the roadside. So it was nearing sunset, and as I was starting to drive home, I found this enormous river red gum tree in a paddock, and this beautiful golden light on the trees and on the paddock, and sheep in the foreground. And so there's a little bird flying away here, slightly out of focus, and couldn't move around because I was shooting through a fence, and so I couldn't get any closer to just get this branch out of the way from another tree. But in a little bit of post-processing, I've managed to pop the foreground and clean up the sky, and just put a little bit of a vignette on it to highlight the tree and the sunlight. And a little further down the road, I managed to find a tree to silhouette the sunset, and I've shot this at ISO 200, 100mm focal length, f5.6, 1/2000th of a second. You can see here that there's blocked up blacks and blown out whites in the shot. And I actually shot a 7-shot bracket here for it, but I couldn't use HDR to blend these photographs together because you can't see them here because it's too dark, but there are sheep in the foreground here. And so normally I would use HDR, but the sheep were moving. And so even between these 7 shots, there was enough movement in the sheep that it meant that you couldn't match them up when you tried to blend those photographs. So I just tried to get as much of the detail in the shadows and maintain the colour in the sky as I could, and really quite happy with what I managed to pull out of the dark there. So the last shot for the day, I wanted to test out the camera and the 12 to 35mm lens for Milky Way astrophotography. So here's a plain RAW shot at ISO 3200, 12mm lens, so it's the equivalent of 24mm focal length. Aperture is f2.8 and the shutter speed is 20 seconds. So if we have a close look up in the sky, you can see there's a fair bit, but it's fine grain noise in the background. There's a little bit of blue chromatic aberration on some of the larger stars, but if we go up into the corners, even though there's a little bit of vignetting which can be easily managed in post-processing, there's virtually no coma. And if we go around here, a little bit here of a sort of weird shaped stars, mostly I think because of this chromatic aberration, but I'm quite pleased with the way that this lens is rendering the stars in the corners. So obviously there's not enough detail in a single shot in comparison with the noise in the background. So what I did was to stack 20 shots, 15 shots of shot for the background, and I then took some additional shots to expose for the foreground, and I did a little bit of light painting on this foreground to light it up as well, and then combined those in Photoshop and Starry Landscape Stacker to get a relatively noise-free, and if we look at the final version here, a relatively noise-free background. This one's possibly a little bit over-processed, but I quite like the colours, and so I just went a little bit silly with it, but I quite like it. I'm going to probably have another 2 or 3 goes at processing to see what I can get. But very pleased with this lens and this camera. If you stack multiple shots, single shots for 20 or 30 seconds are not going to be good enough to get rid of all of that noise, but I'm very pleased with the ability to stack these shots and get relatively noise-free and a lot of detail in the Milky Way and the individual stars.
Thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please like, subscribe, share, tell your friends, do all those things. But remember, pixels are free, so get out there and shoot more. Bye for now.